I so want to talk about Arcane. I'm a little late to the party with season 1, but it's incredibly good. Far more challenging as a show than I expected it to be, and there's a lot of different things I could make videos on, but right now I want to talk about my favourite scene from the show, because it's a scene I feel really gets to the heart of everything this show is about, so I am going to break all of it down, and you have until the end of the intro to guess what the scene is, what I think the best scene in the entire show is. If you get it right, I don't know, you can have a sticker. The scene is from episode 6, and it's when we get to see young Victor. Technically there's 2 scenes of young Victor, and we're going to talk about them both because the context of both is important, but obviously we're going to start with the first one, which is how this episode opens, and it's such an intriguing scene, it's incredibly poetic. So yes, we've got this beautiful spot that Heimerdinger later refers to as a steel oasis, and I like that phrase. It makes it feel like such a blending of nature and machine, which we know are regularly blended in this world. We see kids playing where it's sunny and the water looks brightest, but instead we pan away from that, down into the shade, where we can see the rust and paint of the metal contaminating the water, where we go literally down, beyond this small crag to find a young Victor. He's made a boat. But then this girl appears, who seems to be a young Sky, and she's interested. Again, a beautiful shot that I think is important for several reasons. One, Sky is geographically above him here. She has the high ground, as Obi-Wan would say. Which isn't to say she's superior or better or anything at all, but I think it does reflect how Victor feels. Smaller, inferior, an outcast, beneath others to some extent. It's kind of wild of me to just interpret that based on one shot, but I think what we do know of Victor elsewhere does support that idea. Particularly later in this very scene, he is later asked why he isn't playing with the other children, and Victor's answer is to reveal the fact that he requires a walking stick, as if to say, of course I'm not, look who I am, the other kids don't want to play with me. Which is, heartbreaking, but also possibly something he did experience to varying degrees. Victor can't easily run about, he can't be jumping off rocks in pools. When Victor can't keep up with their pace, would they see him like a burden, or as someone boring? Or at least, would Victor worry that that is how they see him? I think we even see the older Victor is uncomfortable with the limelight, offers it all to Jace, doesn't have many close connections. Is there a point about self-esteem and self-value to make here? Maybe, I think it will become clearer later on in the video here, but secondly, I like this shot because of the clear physical divide between the two of them. I assume there are other ways for Victor to get up to the top of that rock, I assume there are other paths to get back to the pool, but what we see here, Victor isn't going to be able to scale that, he's not going to be able to close the gap between him and Sky. And 3, despite how geographically lower down and isolated Victor is, he does still have sunlight. He's not shut away in a cave right now. That fact I think will be important, as is the fact Sky came to see him. Yes, Victor can't physically close the gap between them, reach her position, but she could reach his. Here is this girl suddenly taking an interest. That's kind of surprising to him. Why is she interested? What's going on? Victor's answer is to pull the cord on his boat, to look down at it and then look back up as if to say, is this what's caught your eye? Is this interesting? You know, not me, but the boat. And then Sky hears her name being called and she leaves without a word. Is that not super cool as a very brief, seemingly innocuous exchange? Here is someone Victor might be able to connect with. Someone is looking to him and he might say hello or wave or ask who she is, try to reach her back. I think we can understand his shyness, obviously, but it's not that I might be interesting. It's not she is interested in me, might want to talk to me or play with me or anything of that. It's the boat. This external thing that I made, yes, but that's the only thing that could possibly make me interesting. I think this tiny exchange sums up a lot of older Victor and Sky's relationship. Because again, Victor as a person is not interesting, it's the things he creates in his mind. That's what matters. When he talks about legacy, that's what he means.
I suppose your legacy has been well secured. As one of Piltover's founders, What haven't you to show for your remarkable life?
Which, as we know, isn't necessarily true. You're not just remembered, and you don't just matter for the things you create. That's kind of what's so great about this small scene with Heimerdinger and Jace, where they talk about Stanwyck Padidley, a man who literally created nothing successful, and yet none of that is his legacy. He is remembered for his commitment to his students, for who he is as a person. So Victor's view of legacy isn't necessarily true, but it is definitely how he feels. I need to achieve something great in order to be remembered, because who I am as a person, that's not enough. Jace can sign all of his own notes with a level of self-importance. Jace can give speeches and step into the limelight as the face behind his own creations. I keep to the shadow. I am a shadow beneath what I create. And I think Skye exists in this story to challenge that idea, because she is very interested in Victor. She makes attempts to walk home with him and get close to him, not because of his brilliant creations. And it's not the hex core that inspires her, it is Victor himself, how tirelessly he works. His passion, his moral belief in doing something good for others, that's why she likes him.
But watching how you work so tirelessly to make the world a better place, well, I couldn't forgive myself if I didn't try.
And I think that's exactly what we're seeing here. Someone interested in Victor as a person, someone he might be able to reach, only Victor thinks it's just his boat. And I find that really tragic, especially with what happens to Skye. I doubt Victor had any interest in a relationship with Skye, but that's kind of not the point here. The point is Victor as a person matters. Only Skye had to lose her life before he even realised that. This is just beat 1 in the scene though. I want to take this further. And that means discussing more about the themes of isolation and scientific greatness and brilliance, because in Arcane, achieving brilliance comes at a great cost. In real life, Brilliant is free for the first 30 days with 20% off a premium subscription. Yes, this video is sponsored by Brilliant, the app to learn through active engagement. They have thousands of interactive classes broken down into digestible steps so you can learn a little every day. Yeah, if you want to learn stuff like maths, programming, data analysis, logic and deduction is a cool one. Science, physics, you know, all the sorts of things that people like Victor and Heimerdinger are whizzes at, but me, I'm naturally good at emotion and literature and then nothing else at all. So Brilliant appeals to me. I continue to be inspired by the film Oppenheimer, and I continue on my quest to learn quantum physics, and I'm a big advocate of interactive lessons as a whole. Don't just explain or show or even test you on the knowledge, but actually walk you through it, get you thinking in the right frame of mind, understanding the process, solving problems step by step. Brilliant is genuinely great for that. And as ever, I like promoting things that have a free version for you to try out for as long as you want to, but I can go one step further than that. I can give you a link for 30 days free access to the premium version, and if you do like it and you want to stick around on your own quests to learn things, then there's also 20% off an annual subscription as well. So click the link in the description or the pinned comment or scan the QR code and see what you think. Brilliant. So instead of Victor, it's the boat that then dominates the scene. And I know it's just typical gears, but I do love how this same looking gear is the one positioned behind Victor in the next scene at his favourite spot. I think it shows something of his inspiration. Victor does create this wonderful, genuinely brilliant toy. It's sweet seeing him happy with himself, and the music is so serene. He lets it go and it works, and he follows where it leads him. And this is the bit I think feels very poetic to me, because where do your creations lead you? What does the world do with the progress you give it? It speeds away faster than you can possibly keep up or keep within your personal control. This to me feels like a metaphor for that, which is kind of what's so beautiful about creation, I think, right? That it does take on a life of its own, but that's also what's so dark and dangerous, that it does journey out of your control. It seems poignant to me in that sense that Victor's great invention in this show, the hex core, is very much a creation that takes on a life of its own. That's kind of what it is by definition, and that is so beautiful and yet so dangerous. And part of me wonders if the fact this is his creation, this was his theory, reflects again a lot about how he sees himself. Not someone creating tools to suit his own means, but creating something real and alive, something purer and better than him.
Molding them to a useful function, tools as you like to put it, but it's said the Arcane speaks through them. They think. They adapt.
Something independent because I won't be enough. I can't make myself enough, but I can make something that is. But in this case, it's the danger that takes precedent. I doubt copyright allows me to play the music much here, but the violin seamlessly changes from slow and serene to fast and anxious here with this dark cello beneath. Victor can't keep up, and so it disappears off into this secluded, shaded cave. It's just perfect. And let me phrase this question more literally as well. Where does this creation lead Victor? Towards sky? Towards the sunlight? Towards community or warmth? Or no? It leads him to an isolated man who talks quite a lot about loneliness. This is where Victor's scientific and engineering endeavours lead him. There were two paths here, one with a gap Victor didn't know how to possibly scale, and the other with waters that flowed out past his control. It's sad because Singed is kind of an opposite to Sky here, kind of tells him an opposite message. Well, let's look at that, because it's the boat that steams ahead and catches Singed's attention where Victor hides away behind cover. Even when Rio spots him and Singed calls out for him not to be afraid, his focus is still fixed on the boat, on the creation rather than the person.
You built this.
Even as the conversation continues, he barely takes his eyes off the boat, only quickly glancing at Victor.
Why aren't you playing with the others?
As we've already said, Victor's answer is to reveal his leg, but this is another small, seemingly innocuous but quite meaningful exchange, because Singed responds to that,
Loneliness is often the byproduct of a gifted mind.
That's an odd reply. That's not what Victor was expressing. Victor doesn't believe I'm alone because I'm brilliant. If anything, he feels the reverse. I'm alone because I'm not good enough. I then make things to make up for the fact I'm not good enough. Singed believes differently, however. Either he's just being nice to Victor, and it is quite a nice thing to say in a lot of ways, but mainly I think Singed is projecting here. His own feelings about his own isolation. I am alone because I am too gifted for society. I am too beyond, too above. We don't see much of Singed, but I think that is kind of his core belief in this show. That all of his work, all of his science positions him as more and more isolated, unwanted, cast out from everyone and everything besides perhaps Silco. And in a way he is right. His discoveries challenge social ethics, challenge what is morally right, what should be explored in science, what other people can accept or want to accept. They don't agree with Singed's research. They think it's wrong, but from his perspective, they can't handle his research. They aren't brilliant enough, gifted enough to understand that ethics is secondary to the science. That's his view, and in that sense, Singed is isolated and shunned from society, either because it is genuinely wrong to conduct his research, or because society is wrong to reject it. And I kind of like that question. Am I an outcast because what I am doing is unacceptable, or is it the fault of others to be unable to accept it? This is a tangent now, but I think Singed kind of has a point. I mean, Jace's work was almost destroyed. Society was ready to exile him because they feared the danger of magic. They couldn't accept what he was proposing. However, the show tells us that the council was wrong to reject it. Jace and Victor are just about able to convince them, and it leads Piltover to great prosperity. It kickstarts an age of progress. Jace becomes the face of the city. In that sense, Jace didn't deserve to be cast out for his research. He deserved for his research to be accepted. Do we know for certain Singed deserved anything different? But yeah, Singed feels he was too ahead of the council, and therefore his gifted mind led him to isolation. It was their fault for not being able to keep up with him. He makes the same point when he offers Victor Shimmer.
If you take this path, they will despise you.
And I think our other clear scientist in the show,
That's me!
we could argue her brilliant mind also leads to isolation. Tenuously at least, we could kind of say her scientific discoveries led to the loss of Vander, Milo and Clagor, and as far as she understands it, caused Vi to reject her. It's a big theme in this show. Isolation, being socially outcast. Sometimes when you make an impact on the world, it doesn't respond with open arms. However, beyond all of this waffle, what about Victor? How does any of this relate to a child with a cool boat he created? You know, Singed as a character does touch on something philosophical and ethical there, but are we really arguing that this relates to a child Victor? No, that's insane. That's why this is all projection from Singed. His experiments may have made him an outcast, but a child with a small boat. Victor is not being exiled for that. We've literally just seen someone taking an interest in Victor. It doesn't need to lead to loneliness. Victor is not doomed to that. It doesn't have to be the inevitable outcome of progress and science. But it's what Victor is told at a young and impressionable age. I think it also taps into Victor's beliefs about not being interesting, maybe being inferior, and so he listens to what Singed says here. Had he been able to walk a different path, his experiences with Sky might have been telling him something very different to this. And it's sad because Singed is almost telling Victor something quite important and truthful, that you are not an outcast for reasons of not belonging, Victor. It's not because you aren't worthy of belonging. If society hasn't made a space for who you are, then society is wrong and needs changing. But you are worthy as a person, and you can find that and you can make that space. Singed is almost touching on part of that message, but then veering away from it. As much as he's saying it's not Victor's fault he's alone, he is saying he is inevitably lonely, that it's a natural byproduct of his brilliance. Victor believes him. And that's so very tragic. The vast majority of Victor's actions, I think, do kind of lead him in that direction. He risks everything to help Jace steal back his research, and yet he's pretty blasé about the risks. Jace is doing that because that's his life's work, he doesn't want to lose it, but Victor? And then the Hex Tech. Heimerdinger tells him to destroy it, but Victor disagrees. He even goes to Singed, who is very much a shunned figure, and asks for his advice about it.
If you take this path, they will despise you. Love and legacy are the sacrifices we make for progress. It's why I parted ways with Heimerdinger.
And this sacrifice of love and legacy, Victor is more than willing to make that, with only a small thought for Jace. And maybe it's a bit of a stretch, but I think that's because a part of Victor believes this is inevitable anyway. That he was always going to be an outcast, that he kind of already is. You know, I don't know what Victor's arc is going to be in the next season. My guess, for reasons mainly of all this butterfly symbolism that keeps popping up around Victor, and how butterflies are literally animals changed from caterpillars, it makes me think he is going to live, just also be altered and have a big transformation in his nature, the kind of one the Hex Core is offering. Despite how he ends this season, he might also fall down a similar route as Singed, becoming disillusioned with the society around him for its failings, isolating himself from it rather than working to fight it, partly because he has always felt doomed to it, failing to see he was always in the sunlight. And in terms of ethics, to Singed, ethics are irrelevant in place of the science. To Victor, the ends, I think, justify the means. You don't need to think too much about the consequences if you're working to create something good. But what if the consequences aren't the ones you were expecting, are something far more horrible? What if it's not just your own personal sacrifices that come as a cost? As we said, however pure your intentions may be, it's hard to predict what happens with the progress you offer the world, or how it might sail out of your own personal control. This is a huge theme in the story, where progress leads, and Victor is so tragically caught up in his own self-sacrifice that he fails to see it until it's too late. And I think perhaps the influence Singed may play on a young Victor is relevant there. But all the same, I think it's time we actually properly got back to the scene. I've kind of veered away a little bit there, and we need to discuss everyone's favourite topic, death. Victor asks,
"What is it?"
meaning Rio. Either this is again an example of taking interest in the creation over the person behind it, or it's because Rio is a bit more than just a creation. Rio is a living being, this strange but really cute living being.
She's a rare mutation that I cultivated.
Victor comes forwards and feeds Rio, and it's nice, it's connection. Science made something beautiful here. It's sweet and heartwarming. It again reminds me very much of this Hex Core being this living being cultivated through science. But Singed explains that she's dying.
I'm attempting to prevent that. The mutation must survive.
Can I help?
Of course Victor wants to help. This is a sweet animal that's dying, and Victor is a kid who cares. It's like the day I found a pigeon with broken wings when I was about 9 years old and I wanted to take it to the vets. It's just kind of natural. What's interesting is Singed's response.
You want to assist me? very well.
I like both the surprise, the idea that anyone would want to work with him, hits to the insecure child within there, but also the wording, assist. This isn't truly about saving an animal he cares for, from Singed's perspective. This is scientific work, this is professional, and Victor is an assistant.
We can be loners together.
Loners, not lonely, because remember, they are doomed to be loners. It is a part of their identity as gifted minds. And that is where the scene ends, but context is important, because this scene leads directly into adult Victor, sitting before the steel oasis, giving us the sense he has been reflecting on this very memory with Singed. And then he and Heimendinger talk about death, the fact Victor is dying. And that makes it seem as though the reason Victor has been reflecting on this memory is because of Rio, the fact she was dying too. Victor is relating to her perspective. And you know, we then get Heimendinger saying he's very sorry about Victor's prognosis, despite also having condemned the one scientific tool that might be able to save Victor's life, so it feels a little insensitive there.
It's a sad truth that those who shine brightest often burn fastest.
He's not dead yet, Heimendinger. Jesus. Victor is thinking a lot about Rio, and what happened to Rio? Well, one day Victor came by to feed her and found she was strapped up to these tubes in terrible pain. He runs forwards to hug her.
Rio will live.
You did this?
I thought you understood. The mutation must survive.
Victor runs away in horror and disgust because the aim isn't worth the cost. I mentioned earlier about the consequences of your work not being the ones you expected. Rio could live, but she will suffer terribly and likely be altered in many ways. In this case, Rio ends probably comatose, locked in this tank, like a fossil in an exhibit. Is life worth living for Rio then? Is it worth this struggle to survive? Likely not. Is this a struggle endured for reasons of love, even? No. It's an experiment. The mutation must survive. That's Singed, but it's not what Victor wants. All Victor's science is for the idea of doing something good for others. And so when it's not doing good, when it's just causing pain, he doesn't understand. Which is also great wording, I thought you understood. It's not a disagreement or a difference of opinion, it's Victor failing to understand Singed's higher calling. Look, where am I going with this? It's that adult Victor finally comes back, having contemplated his own death and thought of Rio, and he says to Singed,
I understand now.
In the first scene, Victor was relating to Rio. Like her, I am dying, but to be saved requires dabbling in dark and dangerous experiments that Heimendinger has outright condemned as awful. Is it worth the cost and the pain? Well, yes, Victor decides. Which is when we get to the second flashback, because adult Victor is now not just relating to Rio, but also to Singed. His perspective of the mutation must survive. And this is finally where everything comes full circle. Victor now wants to live, and the clearest reason for why comes in him telling Singed that I understand now. The mutation must survive. That's why. Not for himself, not for reasons of his own life or friendships, but for his work. If Victor dies, his hex core almost certainly won't be completed, at least as far as he believes. It's not just his legacy will fade into nothing, it's that his work, this living thing that has taken on a life of its own outside of him, that will die. Victor must survive for the sake of his creation, which again he values far more than he values himself. It's like the whole thing is an odd flip on his child motivations to save an innocent Rio, because unlike Rio being strapped up to tubes in terrible pain, it will be Victor himself that suffers this time. A kind of I will be strapped up to tubes as a sacrifice for Rio to live, or in this case his hex core. He's kind of identifying both with Rio and Singed there. And so where he once was horrified by the idea of an innocent Rio suffering in order to live, he's now happy to endure that pain himself because he doesn't feel he matters as much. It's this strange kind of paradox where Victor forcing himself to survive is kind of a self-sacrifice. There's something quite sad in that. Forcing himself to survive for what? Victor is wrong. He is not the only sacrifice. His personal life is not the only consequence. Sky also becomes a cost. She is sacrificed, and just as seeing Rio in pain horrified him, so does this. And that's where he decides to let it all go, to accept death. both of himself and of his research. Victor can't be the only sacrifice, and as he realises, as is a near perfect counter to Singed's approach.
In the pursuit of great, we fail to do good.
There is a really nice but also dark and tragic story here of someone struggling to accept their mortality, and I love it. The story with Rio explores it so succinctly and with a great deal of depth that gets to the heart of what this show is about. Not just what scientific progress means and may cost, not just society and isolation and when you are accepted, but also the struggle with mortality. Time and time again, people fighting to prevent it. Like, just examples off the top of my head. Victor stops Jace from dying. Caitlin stops Vi from dying. Singed stops Rio from dying. Silco stops Jinx dying in a situation that absolutely mirrors Rio. Jinx stops Milo and Clagger from dying within her mind. Even Vi kind of stops Powder from dying in the face of Jinx. Heimendinger is either immortal or something quite close, I don't entirely understand there, but so many examples of preventing or fighting against death. And what is it all for?
It's not enough to give people what they need to survive. You have to give them what they need to live.
When is it right? When is it unnatural? When is it for the sake of sheer possession or the fear of loss? Well, my favourite example is actually the fact Silco would rather kill Jinx than lose her to Vi. Because that kind of loss, to a man obsessed with loyalty and betrayal, to a man who feels like he needs Jinx, losing her to Vi is like a greater death than her literally dying, despite how hard he had tried earlier in the show to save her. You know, preventing death and loss and meddling with nature is such a big question in this show, and there are lots of different ideas raised, but I think this small story about Rio is a perfect microcosm for all of that. In this story, we get to explore Victor's feelings of inferiority and how they've constantly driven him to put his creations and progress and tireless work first, if he can't be enough to then create something that can. And also we see how Singed's own projected feelings might have contributed to this for Victor, the ease with which he can lose himself to isolation and lose all perspective on everything beyond the work. And also a struggle at the core of this show about mortality, the fight against it, the fight for progress that can prevent it, and then the increasingly complex question that, in the face of so much development and change, when is it better to just let go? When does progress turn from something wonderful to prevent problems into a frightening problem of its own? And, okay, this has probably been the most all over the place video I've ever made, to be honest. This is very haphazard. I've had a very busy week, and I probably did need a bit more time to find more concise words for all of this, but nonetheless, I'm just super passionate to get something out. And I do think this is the best scene in the show. It's moving, it's poetic, it cuts to the core of all of Arcane's most central themes. I absolutely love it. Plus, Victor is possibly my favourite character. Today has just been an absolute blast watching the show. But yeah, it is all entirely new to me, so please add stuff in the comments. Those of you who have experienced this show for a lot longer than I have, let me know if you want more. I'd be interested to take a bit more time, make some proper psychological character analyses on Jinx or Vi or maybe a few others. And I'm very excited for season 2 now. Very excited. So like this video if you liked it. Subscribe, maybe even support me on Patreon or buy me a coffee, but otherwise, hopefully see you next time. And as ever, a special thank you goes to Flying Spider, Grace, Kellyanne Davidson, Luke Orr, Michael Gallagher, Chad Bramwell and Joshua C. Follier. Thank you.